Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of Destroy Before Listening. This is another episode where myself, Pete Byrne, and Chay, Lawence take a shot at discussing some horror soundtracks. There were a load of films to talk about, too many to take in because there was about another hour of recording, which was either just brainstorming or rambling tangents. We start with the obvious look at John Carpenter, then Tangerine Dream's contribution, as well as Herzog's Nosferatu. There were a number of soundtracks from the 90s where bands played a huge role in a film's visibility, like The Crow for instance. The brilliantly curated soundtrack for Return of the Living Dead is also discussed, as well as obviously the huge influence of Goblin. Please rate, review, subscribe and share this, or follow on Instagram at Destroy Before Listening. Thanks.
The thing that kind of made me think about, soundtracks it's Halloween, and Halloween is the time of year, at least in my house, where I pull out the soundtrack albums, just kind of for ambience at this time of year. Get the Halloween soundtrack out. I don't really buy a lot of horror soundtracks, but this is the time of year when they come out. Just because it's the time of year when that you'd actually kind of listen to those albums actively. Whereas listening to the Halloween soundtrack in July is a bit weird.
Yeah. So what do you find is the attraction of that soundtrack this time of year? And well, start with John Carpenter.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has probably just like really iconic soundtracks, and they're instantly recognizable. So yeah, I mean, the Halloween soundtrack, obviously, but I'm trying to think what other soundtracks. I mean,
The
the
Fog.
other. What's that?
I'm a big fan of The Fog. Me, I love that soundtrack.
Fog's good as well. Yeah.
When you've got a soundtrack or theme that becomes like the movie as well. So as soon as the kind of associate.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the soundtracks they don't just they kind of bring back memories of the films themselves, and you can just kind of instantly see the film running in your head as the soundtrack's playing.
Yeah,
They're very like you said, they're very evocative of the film itself. But another one of the scores that I always reach for this time of year is another Carpenter film, but not a Carpenter soundtrack. It's like the Thing soundtrack, which is Ennio Morricone.
okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it's the only film that Carpenter has got someone else to score for him. And yeah, then he got Morricone to do the Thing. And the Thing soundtrack is like pretty. If I had like one favorite horror soundtrack, it's got to be the Thing. It's a
Okay.
great soundtrack. It's wonderful score. Really kind of eerie.
What do you know of the guy who he composed with as well? Like Alan Howarth?
Uh, Not much. I know they were like friends in college or something. I know Alan Howarth he was involved in filmmaking as well. Weren't they in a band together? I thought the
Really?
band, yeah,
Right, yeah, okay.
oh yeah, the Coupe de Villes,
Okay.
which was his band, and I think the Big Trouble in Little China song.
Yeah.
I think that's their band. But I think Alan Howarth was not. He was not just like a friend of John Carpenter. I think he was involved in film production as well. And the other guy in the band was actually Michael Myers in the first Halloween film. He played Michael Myers.
Was it?
Something weird like that. Yeah.
Alright.
Just
Coincidence? Well, not
com-
coincidence.
yeah, complete nonsense facts I'm pulling out my ass. But no, yeah, I think that's right.
Have you seen The Keep in Near Dark before? Because we're going to talk about the Tangerine Dream kind of.
I've seen it keep once. It was a while ago. I've seen Near Dark once, I think, as well. So I've seen them both. I mean, I know Tangerine Dream pretty well.
Oh yeah,
I can kind of still hear the keep theme in my head.
because it's more like Edgar Frost. I guess he's the only constant throughout the kind of soundtracks or the soundtrack era, the soundtrack stuff they were doing. The Keep is more of a sort of a traditional style of Tangerine Dream, like the kind of late 70s, early 80s. I don't know where they're getting it from because I'm sure a film like Sorcerer, I think they just did the soundtrack. I think like Friedkin had like asked them to do something, but like I don't think he'd sent anything or they hadn't. I don't know, like looked at the brief or anything like that. They just kind of like did a soundtrack,
Yeah.
and I think that's
I
how
mean,
that one came about.
he was probably like, I just want some Tangerine Dream music to stick on my film.
Yeah, so that there's that, but then which I imagine they got quite a lot of money for. But then there was a film I watched the other week, Wavelength. That's kind of a strange one. It's it's like a B movie because they do the score for that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's along the lines of the Village of the Damned. Like they've got these alien children in a kind of sealed off in this.
Is that an old film? 70s or 80s?
It's like early 80s, like I don't know, 83, 84.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it on. Yeah, I got a download of it anyway,
Right.
but it's from a VHS or something. It's pretty sketchy quality. But they soundtrack that, and they don't really submit anything other than what you would expect. Really, I mean, they must have maybe watched that one because it's more like cues than it is. I don't know how you go about soundtracking or how they went about. That's something I'd be quite interested to kind of learn about is how they soundtrack stuff.
Well, I guess there's a hundred different ways to do it. I mean, I just assumed they would sit down with some rough cuts of the movie and then just kind of soundtrack around that. But maybe not. Maybe it's just like some, you know, just rough directions from the director.
I'm not so sure if they did or not because they just kind of seem to be doing their own thing in a way. And I mean, by the Near Dark, which is like 87, it's more like Edgar Frost and he's the only like constant. And you can kind of, it's hard to pull apart who does what in Tangerine Dream until you hear what they contribute solo wise or the kind of sounds or the little like motifs and stuff they use little
Yeah.
by themselves and then how it works combined.
Especially as they go on as a band, because when they first started, I think like the first album was like bass, drums, and guitar,
Yeah.
and you can kind of pull it apart. But then, like 10 years later, they're all on synth, so it's like who's playing what? You don't
Yeah.
know.
And there's loops going of what sounds like well electric guitars, guitar solos,
Yeah,
and like drums, like program sequence drums as well and things. So it's hard to know who's doing what and who's controlling what because there's probably a big list of equipment that they're all using, or there is individually, and then together it's like how do they hear or how do they know? It's almost like start the machine up and kind of it just probably happens,
yeah,
or they smoke a joint or something, and then that's that.
yeah. I wouldn't doubt it. I'm trying to remember who was in the band. There was Edgar Froese and Klaus Schultz, and
It was the drummer on the first record, but the classic, I suppose, later 70s or the 80s, this where they are soundtracking is Christopher Frank and Johann Schmalling,
Mhm.
who I think he was more of a guy because they got more like synth people in. Obviously, they got more synth people in, but
Yeah.
or someone who could handle that side of things.
So going back to
Hmm.
the Keep, the thing about the Keep is it's a movie about World War II, but it's really 80s. It's like super stylish because it's directed by
Yeah,
Michael Mann, who's
yeah,
like everything he touches is like Miami Vice.
yeah,
I remember it has a lot of like backlit like scenes in the castle and like a lot. Does it have a lot of neon in it? I'm thinking it does.
yeah. It's got a bit of a. Well, it's strange because there's a lot of kind of atmospheric things in the way that it's lit
Yeah,
in that way, and you're kind of subtly becoming drawn
Every,
in, I suppose.
yeah. Everything looks like it's like a Crockett and Tubbs World War II castle. And you got
Yeah,
this like 80s synth score that's like underlying everything. And then doesn't the monster have like glowing eyes and stuff?
Yeah, it does.
I remember it now. Yeah,
And there's a lot of smoke and kind of yeah, atmospherics, which is that's a good film anyway.
yeah. I don't remember much about it. It's been a while since I've seen it. I think it's one of those films that's kind of still really hard to get. Maybe not. Probably haven't checked in a while. But I remember looking for it probably about 10 years ago, and I couldn't get it on like Blu-ray or DVD back in the day. At least not over here.
No, no, I think it's probably been. Oh no, the soundtrack. Yeah, it would have been because I'm sure the soundtrack got released like recent years,
Yeah,
like given an actual release, official release and stuff. So I'd imagine that the film would have been redone.
pretty tied up in legal disputes or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I need to go back and watch that. Is that the only horror film that Michael Mann's ever done? I'm trying to think.
it's a kind of horror action
Yeah,
thriller type thing all at once, really. I'm guessing that this what we're thinking is a looser approach to scoring with Tangerine Dream, more hands-on with Werner Herzog.
yeah. I mean, I can imagine like Michael Mann would definitely be a lot stricter with his requirements than Herzog, for example.
Yeah,
I could see Michael Mann going to Tangerine Dream saying, "Oh, I can see it's a castle. It's late at night. It's mysterious."
yeah.
Wanting the exact piece that he had in mind.
Sorry, I think with Herzog and well, it's his work with Popol Vuh, isn't it?
Yeah,
I don't know if I imagined this or read it. I think I read it that they went on location with him for like months or month at a time, or whatever, or periods of time, in the jungle or somewhere, or like in Transylvania or wherever they're filming Nosferatu or somewhere, and
hmm
like to capture more of the true essence of the musician's reaction to the environment to create a whole different atmosphere. I would imagine.
yeah, and yeah. As a band, the early pop art stuff is all like electric and kind of '60s psychedelic freak out stuff. And then as they progress as a band, it's all it's a lot more new agey, and they're just using more like acoustic instruments and like unusual instruments. So it kind of fits with their approach. They would just kind of try to take cues from the environment and make music with that.
Yeah, I mean, I had like pastoral is a word,
Yeah,
which I mean they have pictures of like fields with animals in on the covers of their albums and things. So it's more of a spiritual vibe
yeah,
and
yeah,
ethnic instrumentation.
yeah. And a lot of those kind of krautrock bands, they kind of like Asherah Temple. I think they took a similar kind of approach in the '70s. They got more like you say pastoral, and then you had other bands like Kraftwerk going in like the complete opposite direction.
Yeah, I think stuff like Tangerine Dream and Popol Vuh is when I was thinking about it a bit more, they're more like the first sort of post rock bands in a way, aren't they? Because they're following or coming from rock backgrounds, but then they're using different instruments or synths or whatever,
Yeah,
and it creates a whole different thing to like a 70s, what you would think as a 70s hard rock band or just 70s rock band.
no, for sure. I mean, I think 99% of what people call post rock these days is probably done in Germany in the '70s.
Yeah,
I mean, especially like Can. I mean, like I remember when I first heard Can in the '90s, and it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa, these guys did this like before I was even born.
there's the documentation as well, because a lot of these groups got on like major labels or bigger labels, and they got a lot of like records pressed. Or I suppose now it wouldn't be as noticed really, or could go unnoticed.
Yeah,
The profile is big enough, Virgin Records or something, and or whatever, you can get your tape on like all formats all around the world. And
Yeah, and when you think about it, I mean, like going back to Tangerine Dream, all those early albums were on Virgin. They got distribution the world over, and those like first four albums, they're fucking out there. I mean, Zeet is still one of my favorite
yeah,
albums, and it's just like a double album, four
yeah,
songs, drone.
yeah, yeah,
It's like, how did this get printed up on a major label? It still blows my mind. I was going to say, let's go back to Nosferatu here.
yeah. Sorry, no, yep. That's one of my favorite
Yeah, it's a
films
great
as well.
soundtrack. Yeah.
Yeah,
Until you mentioned it, I've forgotten about it. It's just I haven't even thought about Nosferatu, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, Papa Vo. It is a great soundtrack. I need to go back and watch that.
that one sets the scene perfectly as well because the whole kind of like clouded mountains, just really high, like sheer rock face and stuff, and the kind of I don't know if it's monks chanting or if it's like a synthetic. I think it probably is.
I think it is. I need to go back and watch it. I have. I remember years ago I bought this giant Herzog box set on DVD, and I don't know, it's stuck in a box somewhere now. I need to go dig it out and find it. But
Yeah,
yeah, great film, and it's kind of interesting as well because you've got Popol Vuh, who are like kind of a maverick kind of crowd rock band, and you got Werner Herzog, who's kind of this maverick film director, and Nosferatu is a pretty traditional film, and they kind of come together. I mean, it really doesn't go too far outside the bounds of the film that it's based upon.
yeah,
And you've got Isabella Gianni, she's in it, right?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and Klaus Kinski.
And Klaus Kinski. So great cast, great director, great soundtrack. Yeah, I need to go back and watch that again.
Great, great
It's been
horror
a while.
film or great is it a horror film? I suppose it is.
I guess it's a horror. I guess it's
It's
a
the
horror film.
traditional. It's the oldest of horror films in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not what you would think of when you think of a modern horror film, but I would certainly think of it as a horror film.
Well, it's got the romantic element,
Yeah,
which is the gothic kind of idea, I suppose.
yeah, for sure. You gotta have a bit of romance in there for a gothic novel. Do you want to talk about Quaidan? Because I think they bookend quite nicely because they're both kind of period horrors.
Yeah.
I don't know who did the Quaidan soundtrack.
I don't know. I would like to guess.
I don't know either, but the Quaidan does have a great soundtrack, and the thing I think of immediately when I think of the Quaidan soundtrack is is it the second story, Yoshi the Earless? Is it Yoshi the Earless? Somebody the Earless. It's about like the musician who goes and plays for the ghosts.
Yeah, that's just it's all. I mean, they're all really haunting, aren't they? Just
Yeah.
everything, the way that the sets are dressed and everything, and because the first one, it's those. Is it the two hunters in the snow, and they see that ghost
Oh.
of the woman?
Oh, the one, and he marries the ghost.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. There's that, and there's the one about the black hair, which is the guy who leaves his wife, and
yeah.
then he comes back years later to like remarry her or something,
It's like
and
yeah, it
she's
comes.
dead.
Yeah, it comes back to the ruin, and the house is ruined and everything, isn't it?
Yeah, and she's a ghost. That's
Yeah,
good, and yeah, they're all good, aren't
yeah.
they?
And then the
Funny,
earless one must be the end one
the Ellis one is probably the end one.
because
Yeah,
he goes to the temple every day or whatever and plays.
yeah, and the monk sends him off, and he covers him in text or something. I don't know, some kind of
Yeah,
which protects him from the ghost, but he forgets to write the text on his ears, and the ghost sees his ears and pulls his ears off. But the sound when the ghosts roll in, and then it's like just immense. Like the whole thing is shot on sound stages. It's no locations. It's
yeah,
just like, and it's a beautiful set, and it's just like the sound of like twisting metal or something. It sounds like a train breaking. I always remember that part of the soundtrack. It's like bowed metal or something.
yeah.
It's really fucking eerie, and the ghosts just kind of roll in and listen to this guy's music, and then they roll out again when the morning comes. But yeah, great eerie soundtrack.
Yeah. Well, another Japanese film soundtrack is the Tetsuo. It's Iron Man, isn't it? Which one was the
Yeah,
first one?
and that's another one of those films I kind of saw once. I think I probably saw it when it first came out on VHS in the 80s. And
Yeah.
was it 80s or 90s? I'm losing track of time.
It would have been like very early 90s. I think maybe it came out
Probably
in Japan.
was.
I cannot remember
Yeah.
the year, but yeah.
I remember someone put it out in the UK, and I bought a VHS copy of it, and thinking it was bananas. But yeah, it's like it got a very kind of industrial.
It goes hand in hand with the film really being like it just fits in pretty seamless to the visuals and the music. You know,
Yeah,
they're both
it's
like
just one whole aesthetic, isn't it?
it's very like jarring,
Yeah,
and that goes with the kind of stop frame bits, and there's the drill obviously.
was it anyone in particular who composed it, or was it the director who composed it? One of his.
No, it was a guy. Chu Ishikawa is the guy's name. Well, they moved to film scores that are composed. You've got some individual. Chances are they're not in a band. It's just some guy or some woman or whatever
Yeah,
who's not associated with the music scene or whatever, so to speak. They just do within
yeah, it would just
the
score stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Then you've got like soundtracks, and there's a lot of that thing happening in I guess it's like the early 90s or the first half of the 90s. There's quite a few films, and they all have like similar bands, being that kind of more alternative industrial edge. And I'd had Brain Scan, the film, and Tad, Primus, Butthole Surfers, Old, White Zombie. Well, the Escape from LA soundtrack, which is Butthole Surfers again, White Zombie, Ministry, Orange 9mm, Deftones, and even Civ. And then the Crow soundtrack, where Nine Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, Rollins Band, Helmet. And then Hardware, even like Ministry has a song on Hardware, the film. So
yeah,
there's a kind of like, there's a pretty much a theme of a certain end of band or music that people were putting on soundtracks for these kind of films in that time period.
I'm just wondering if that was just because these bands were popular with the same demographic, or whether it was because the movie studio, like Universal, also had like a corporate there's a record label associated with it, and they just wanted an opportunity to try to sell soundtrack albums. That's probably worth looking into whether which was the case here.
I think some of there is the bands might not necessarily even be on the soundtrack, or
Yeah.
if they are, they're on like a car stereo for 5 seconds,
Hmm.
but they have a song as a product on a CD or whatever it would have been.
Yeah.
Like 10, whatever, 15 bands of the day who are gonna shift an album with a
Yeah.
kind of like an exclusive track or like a cover version or something.
Yeah, I always thought that period in time when, I mean, that was a period in time when CD sales, like the early 90s, were like sky high. You could pretty much sell anything that was on a CD, and like if Universal movies, they would just like load it up with like Universal music bands, and then just like shift to CD. I bought my daughter a copy of the Crow soundtrack album
All
at
right,
a thrift store for $1 a while ago, just to give to her and say, because she was like really into the 90s, and I was like, well, here you go,
yeah,
here's your soundtrack for the 90s right here.
didn't like it or
I
did.
mean, no, I think she did like
Yeah.
it.
Well, I mean,
But
it's like it's all right. I wouldn't, Rollins Band, Helmet, Nine Inch Nails.
there's some okay stuff on there. It's
Yeah.
not the Judgment Night soundtrack, but it's pretty
No,
good.
no.
But if you look back, and I went through maybe like last year, just like watching a lot of shitty 90s horror films I haven't seen before. and they're so heavy on like the soundtrack bands. It's like, bands of the time. I remember watching like the 13 Ghosts remake and the House on Haunted Hill remake and the My Bloody Valentine remake, and it's just like they backed the truck full of like 90s alternative rock up to these movies and just kind of dumped it in. It's insane how many like bands they like try to shoehorn into these films
Yeah.
compared to today.
I think possibly they try and like break, if a band is a sort of a loss leader thing,
Yeah.
they probably try and break a band with a song on a soundtrack that might be popular. So they just they don't have to worry about licensing so much, even because they're, it's all hand in hand. And they're just trying to like boost bands.
It's strange, yeah. I mean, the album sales support the movie, and the movie supports the album sales, and at the end of the day, it's probably all a wash. It's interesting.
It's all like the kind of high energy soundtrack, and maybe the demographic.
Yeah, I remember I watched the My Bloody Valentine remake, which is shit, but and the whole movie is just like, I think it's like Mudvayne. It's one of those horrible new metal bands from the 90s. It's like they're really pushing this band who are
Fuck it up. Yeah.
just dreadful. It's like it's not bad enough that the movie itself is dreadful. They're just like making it even more dreadful by just like pushing this dreadful band in at every opportunity.
Yeah.
It's almost funny. It's such a train wreck.
That's maybe when you're just using one thing to sell another. If like you're just using a horror or the idea of a horror film to like instantly sell a load of things to people who like horror.
Yeah, and it seems like the complete opposite of. I mean, when you have that kind of thing going on in the 80s, it seems a lot more. It seems a lot less calculated in a way, I guess. I mentioned this on Facebook the other day about like Night of the Demon, and like the main song, the Night of the Demon soundtrack, is a song called Computer Day, and I don't think
I
that
listen to
band.
that. Yeah.
I don't think that it's such a funny track, and I don't think that band even exists. I think it's just like a band that was probably put together by the producers
Yeah.
because they were like, "Oh, we need a punky new wave song that our characters can dance to," and it's just this awful track that they just kind of came up with.
Yeah.
And same thing with like something like I'm just trying to think of the other example.
I've got an example for you.
Oh, go on.
It's there's a film called Monster Club. I don't know if you're aware of it or if you've ever.
Yes.
Vincent Price,
Yep.
1981.
You talk
Well,
about the scene in the club here.
it's just a rough watch all around because I put it on. It was like, okay, you've got this horror anthology sort of like Tales of Terror kind of vibe, Tales from the Crypt or whatever.
Yeah, it's
And
bargain basement.
it's just shit. I mean, it kind of the production values, the arc. Well, I thought it was high. The way it's filmed and everything. It's not just like someone's thrown no money at. It looks good and it's kind of they've obviously had like. Well, this is maybe where they had to make the cutbacks because the soundtrack. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's maybe they couldn't get the rights to a lot of bands and a lot of music and a lot of things.
Yeah,
So
they knocked it up.
So they just knocked it up and were like, "Oh, you're a new wave band. Or you're a sort of like punky looking band. Do you want to be in a film?" And they're probably like they're only a band for about like 6 months, a year or something. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember watching the film and there's one guy on the bass. He looks about like 40. He looks like fucking ancient. He's like, they're not young kind of people who would have been young at the time when new wave and punk and things were happening. So it's just an
you
odd
get the
film.
feeling that some of these bands are just kind of like friends of the producer or something, and they probably
Yeah.
have like a blues jam band at the weekend. And so he's like, "We got to do a punky new wave song."
Yeah.
They're like,
You
"What?"
guys.
I'm not sure what that is, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's a scene in a club, and there's a band that plays, and I'm rolling my eyes at it.
Pretty Things is that's the only band I remember.
Are they in that? Pretty
Yeah,
Things?
I
Really?
think so, yeah.
Wow.
Are you a fan?
I like SF Sorrow, but that's probably about all I know. The other example I always think of is Star Trek 4, the movie, with the
Right.
punk band on the bus. Do you remember that scene?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh,
No.
well, it's like set in modern times and they're all like undercover and sitting on a bus in LA. And it's on YouTube. There's a big fat punk sitting on the bus with a boom box. He's playing it really loud. And it's like, they're not using a real punk song. It's a punk track called "I Hate You," and I think it was like performed
Right.
by the director or something, and
Yeah.
his band. It's really funny. Check it out. "I Hate
Okay.
You," Star Trek 4.
Okay. Well, watching Monster Club, well, to go back to that, I was thinking, who the fuck's on this soundtrack? Who are these people? What's this about? So I looked on Discogs, the soundtrack, to see who it was and if it was like actually if there were copies made. And yeah, it turns out that there were.
Yeah.
The fucking album it's like £100 album.
Hmm.
So if you've got that thing, it's you're sitting on money.
But is anyone good on it?
Well, exactly. No.
So it's purely for the collectors.
Well, it's like a total cult. Must be like really difficult to get a hold of. Probably happened then, and like everyone just forgot
Yeah.
until it was time to like maybe put it on a CD or something, or like stream it or whatever the fuck. I think an example of a good, like a really good film with a really good soundtrack that go together with actual like proper punk bands, proper death rock bands that fit the bill, is the Return of the Living Dead soundtrack, which is like TSOL, like Cramps, Flesh Eaters, 45 Grave, and there's Rocky Erickson track on there as well. So that's one of the few, like a handful of soundtrack albums I have actually own.
Yeah. And that's a good example of like, the kind of soundtrack from the 80s that probably wouldn't have get made in the 90s. It's bands that have a definite there's a definite death rock vibe that goes throughout it. I mean, there's the
Yeah.
Cramps who are more on the rockabilly end, and other bands are more on the punk end. But yeah, there's a definite theme, and you would think that if this movie got made in the 90s, it would just still be shitty new metal or something. Yeah, for sure. And whenever I think about Return of the Living Dead, it's all about, if you want to party,
Yeah.
it's that song. It's like that I think of. So yeah, a great example of like, the soundtrack that's composed of, bands rather than a score. That's just kind of like, it's part of the whole package rather than just like feeling tacked on like a bunch of Mudvayne songs.
Well,
Shitty 90s horror film.
I think they must have, let just like a record well, it's Enigma Records who
Hmm.
released the soundtrack, and they must have just said, "Oh, like round up, a bunch of punk bands, license this. We've got this film, like a zombie kind of film, and we want like a kind of silly songs
Yeah.
for this film, and can you kind of curate like a set of artists or groups that would like fit in with this film's aesthetic, and like it really, I don't know, it's perfect, really."
Yeah. I mean, even if it was a purely business decision and like, oh, what bands in your catalog have you got that would fit this? It's a whole lot better than what we got in the 90s.
A bit of trivia because, well, of the actual two bands or the pieces of music done by bands in Mandy, is one of them, the last track on the credits is SSQ, which that's the band in Return of the Living Dead. Well, the last sort of they're playing on the sort of the big boombox thing at the end of
Mhm.
Mandy is those two metalheads drinking and they're listening to Venom.
I don't remember. I only watched Mandy once, and I don't remember that. But I'll
Yeah,
take your word for it because
yeah,
it did have kind of a metal theme to it.
yeah. It's Venom Angel Dust. It's like my
Right.
favorite Venom song. So
Well, that is the best Venom song. Yeah.
it is, yeah,
Yeah.
fucking yeah. So from Venom, I'm gonna lead to the like the influence of horror films on more extreme metal music, like death metal and things. What's the main sort of phantasm theme
Yeah.
or
That's the one I
piece?
always think about. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's Entombed, like first Entombed song on Left Hand Path.
Yeah, and that's a great song as well. I remember when I first heard it, I was like, where do I know this music from?
Yeah, I didn't know. I just thought it was like interesting. I didn't know until like a long time later, until seeing the film, that it was Entombed.
Yeah, I think I'd only just seen like Phantasm shortly before I'd heard the album. It was around the same time when I was like, I mean, when did the album come out? Like I keep asking this. When did the album come
91
out? 91.
or
Yeah, so
90? No,
I would
90.
have been
Is it 90 or 91?
I would have been 16. Yeah, that was ground zero for me. Just like just like binging horror films and early death metal. So yeah, I mean, that when I first heard that track, it was kind of blew my mind. It was just kind of mixing that Phantasm theme with like a Dave Gilmour solo on a death metal song. I was like, whoa, steady on, guys.
Yeah.
This isn't what your demo sounded like. And but then I was like, actually, this is really fucking good.
Were you into the Nihilist stuff beforehand?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I used to do around that time, like 88, 89. I used to do a death metal fanzine.
Did you?
It's just yeah, I was like a
What was it
little
called?
metalhead. It was called Mystagog, I think.
Mystical.
I don't think there's probably like no copies anywhere because it didn't really get distributed. But I used to send copies out. I remember we was like, mostly like interviews with like My Dying Bride and Anathema and stuff like that, plus some like metal duck thrown in for good measure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just funny stuff. But I used to do tape trading with like pen pals all over. So yeah, I used to get all the nihilist stuff and all that kind of thing. But yeah,
But you still wish you had a copy of your fanzine.
yeah, I think I've still got the masters somewhere.
Oh,
Well, the
fucking
masters, the ones I put
need to
together with like a glue stick.
we'll do a book. That's what people
Yeah,
normally do. We'll do a book of it.
like the Metallian one, but this one
Yeah.
would be tiny and shit. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah,
Another, not necessarily horror, but like bands using bits of soundtracks of films is Mad Max. There's like a Voivod riff. I
yeah,
think it's Forgotten in Space, isn't it? Because I was watching Mad Max. This is like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. I
yeah,
was like, oh fuck, that's like the Voivod riff. And then I remembered, probably like 5 years before something, reading maybe, because I used to like read the Voivod net site
yeah,
around that time, and there was always people discussing. Oh, it was like really early days of kind of like uncovering information about Voivod, I think.
yeah.
And there was the whole someone saying, "Oh yeah, there's the Mad Max," or they must have just decided to do their take on this Mad Max bit.
I'm gonna pull that out after this and just give it a listen. Thing is, every time I go for a Voivod album, it's always Dimension A Trust. So
All right.
Killing Technology always gets overlooked. But yeah, I'm going to go pull it out. Gee, you're going to be telling me that they didn't write the Batman theme now either. The other thing I was going to mention is like probably not the genre of music that's made like a lot of soundtrack albums, but I think my favorite genre of horror film soundtracks is just kind of like generic 80s droning synth soundtracks, especially like stuff like Sledgehammer, which is like a really low budget shot on video horror film. And I just kind of love that moment in time when like synthesizers were getting cheap enough that everyone can buy them, and video cameras were getting cheap enough that they're becoming more accessible to everyone, and like the shot on video scene just kind of exploded with like shot on cheap consumer electronics with scores from cheap consumer electronics. It's kind of a great moment in time. And yeah, like I said, Sledgehammer is a really good example of that. It's not the greatest movie, but it has some really good moments. It has some really good moments in the score as well. Plus, there's some like like other films at the time, like more high budget films like Maniac and Death Dream that have a lot of like really cool droning synth tracks that just kind of really ominous.
Yeah. How do you think that contrasts? Well, you've got that. That's, I guess that's like the low budget end, and the contrast between that and like Hellraiser or something. You know,
Yeah,
which is more of
well, for
a
sure.
scored, proper scored film, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a story behind the Hellraiser soundtrack, isn't there? I mean, I know Coil did some stuff for it, but it ended up going with another guy. Do you know about that?
No, no, I don't. I don't really. I mean, when I've watched it again, I don't. I'm not like a big Hellraiser fan.
I know there's like a whole album of like Coil music that they scored for the film that I guess didn't get used. Maybe I think Clive Barker didn't like it for one reason or another. It's probably too chipper. But yeah, you can buy that. I think it's called like the Lost Hellraiser themes or something. And then he ended up going with another guy for the score.
The Candyman. Well, to go back to Candyman again, it's Philip Glass.
Yeah, and that's probably the. I'm just trying to think of what's the kind of highest profile horror score in terms of having a name
Oh, okay.
composer. That's always like one that always kind of jumps out. I mean, you've got Philip Glass. He's a pretty prestigious composer, not just in terms of film composing, but an actual composer.
Yeah.
You don't get that very often.
I got a feeling you maybe just did that one a bit offhand because they probably just said, "Ah, do you want to do the horror soundtrack?" And he probably just like, "Yeah," and did it and forgot about it. But
Yeah,
I know he says stuff about still getting like the royalty checks still coming through because of like the success of the film. Really,
yeah,
uh, I do think it is a good like motif to have like running throughout the whole film. It's always good if you've got like a memorable hook or something that you can just use
yeah,
across
yeah.
like various scenes and it still works. You know.
And yeah, that's a good point. And when you think about all the most famous horror soundtracks like Halloween, that's got a famous hook to it. Even something like Friday the 13th, which has got that that kind of like, it's not even a musical hook, but it's like that.
Yeah.
I can't do it, but it's instantly memorable. It's Friday the 13th, and it's kind of like it's not. I guess it's not musical, but it's like an auditory cue. I guess
Yeah.
makes you think that Jason's about, and yeah, I guess that's the hallmark of a good horror soundtrack. It's always good to have a good motif, just to kind of keep things cohesive.
Well, do you know? I'm not. I saw them play live one time, maybe about 10 years ago. Is Goblin? I didn't really know a great deal about them. I just sort of went along and was like, "Oh, I'll check it out." You know, they've done all these famous uh, soundtracks, and you know, there was a lot of people there, and you know, mega fans. But I never really. I suppose I never really got big into Italian horror films, so I don't really.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I like a lot of that. I'm not really a Goblin super fan, and I know a lot of folks are. It's a Goblin, and not just Goblin, but like Fabio Frizzi's been doing a lot of. He did a. I'm not sure if that was recently, but I know he was touring around doing a lot of the old zombie scores that he did, a lot of the Fulci scores,
Yeah,
uh, and they are pretty similar stuff. Goblin. When I think of Goblin, I think mostly of the work they did with Dario Argento, particularly
yeah,
Suspiria, which is like fucking great soundtrack. It's one of probably it's top five for sure. Really good. And yeah, I love the old stories about Goblin as well. That when they used to play back in the day in Italy, they used to set up to play along with the movies. I guess with a full live rig in the cinema. Sounds crazy.
yeah.
But yeah, they definitely share a lot of in common with Frizzy's scores as well. They kind of like a driving, propulsive rock beat, which is it's cool, but it also is kind of like it really kind of places it at a point in time as like this is like this soundtrack sounds Italian in the 70s, which I guess is cool if you're into that kind of thing. And I know a lot of people are because there's bands today that just kind of try to recreate that vibe. I was in a band that used to share a practice space with a band called Zombie, who you might have heard of. I think
I love Zombie. I think Zombie are great.
yeah, we used to share a practice space with them, and when they were just getting started before they did the first album on Relapse, I think. And
Okay, yeah.
yeah, so there's no shortage of people who want to listen to that kind of thing.
So whereabouts is the practice room?
Oh, it was in Chicago when Zombie back then was just like two guys, and they were friends of my friend David, and we just got into the practice space because of that. I remember I went to a barbecue at one of their houses once. Then I think they moved to Philadelphia or something.
Yeah, this must be like a long time ago because that's where they're from, like East Coast. So this
Yeah,
is like the very origins of the band Zombie is in Chicago.
yeah. This would have been way back. Like,
Is it? Fuck.
yeah, this was like 2005, 2006, I think.
Well, I know I saw them. They played over here, 2006.
Yeah,
So it must have been like maybe 2004, 5 or something. Pretty early on, I think.
probably around then. Yeah, it was like I had a really short-lived black metal band, and we shared it. I remember probably only in the practice space for 3 months before our band broke up, and then they moved away to Philly, I think.
Yeah.